Indigenous classification. Indigenous people all over the world have complex and effective classifications of plants and animals, but they do not look like the five kingdom system used by scientists. Indigenous classifications help the people of a tribe or local area to communicate about the plants and animals that are important to them. So what did we understand from this? So not all indigenous people have the same way of classifying their plants and animals, and each system they use is effective for certain people of indigenous people. They do not look like they do not look like the system that scientists use. It helps them to communicate or tell other people in their area about the plants and animals that are important to them. The indigenous people of Australia have sophisticated classification systems that suit the way they live in their environments. So as you can see in figure 6.4.9, we have two indigenous people trying to capture some food. And they're also making sense of their world by classifying things into groups that are important to them. So it might look like they're just hunting for food, but they're also looking around, seeing what they can see, and then trying to put things into groups that make sense for them, that kind of helps them to understand which part of their environment goes with which other part. The classifications take into account relationships the indigenous people recognize between the living and non-living parts of the environment, and group together things that are used in similar ways. So for indigenous people, it's not just the living things, but also anything that they can see in their environment that's important to them. And they think about the relationship between what they can see. Like, they understand the relationship between fish and water or lake. And they group things that have similar use. That means if they find two plants that can heal wounds, then they will classify those two plants together. If they find two animals to be dangerous, they might classify those two animals together. The classification system used by the Yolngu of Arnhem Land, Northern Territory, begins by creating two groups: things that have life and things that do not. Things that have life are further divided into three groups: things that move themselves, such as the sun and planets, or the water and fire. As you can see in figure 6.4.10 on page 268, or with this figure, the people of Yolngu of Arnhem Land classify fire as something that could move itself. Because obviously we can, from this image of bushfire, the fire moves across the forest very quickly. Now, scientists might explain it by other ways, the fire is not moving itself by itself, but for the people of the land, they understand it that way, and that's how they classify fire as something that have life and something that moves. So the other two groups are things that breathe and reproduce. This group includes all plants and animals except humans, and there's a group for humans. So they have a totally different system than what scientists use, and they also include things like water, fire, sun, and planets as something living that have life. Things that breathe and reproduce. Things that breathe and reproduce are then subdivided into 9 different sets. For example, Yogya is the name of a group that includes all fish. The Harpa is all plants with woody stems. Warenken includes all land or freshwater mammals, birds and reptiles, with the exception of snakes. Figure 6.411 shows some Warenken. Babi is the group to which snakes, legless lizards, and worms belong to. So you can see that they have a different way to classify animals and plants into smaller groups that have different names to what we call them, and different animals and plants are put into different groups. So I want you to try in your book to summarize what you learned from this reading about indigenous classification. Make it short, you don't need a long paragraph, just a few interesting and important facts that you think will help you understand more about indigenous classification, or you think interesting. Next part is a bit more understanding about the levels of classification. As you can see, these are again the levels that we talked about, kingdom being the most general and species being the most specific. So a way to also remember, as we go down, organisms or living things become more alike. The figure description says organisms are classified first into broad groups, kingdoms. So these are very broad. At each new level of classification, the organisms become more similar. So as we go down, the animals or plants or whatever living thing becomes very similar. The type of living things that we include in each level become more similar. Again, I said it here, as we move down, there will be less animals in each group. That's a fact as well. And they will look more similar to each other. A good way to remember the different levels is by remembering this. Keep placing cakes orders for good students. It's just true. If you're a good student, you'll get cake. Just joking. Keep placing cake orders for good students. There's different ways. If you can come up with your own way to remember the levels, that'll be great. Share it with the class if you want as well. Keep it appropriate. So, for example, can show you here how this is represented. So these belong. So we have these animals, and animals or animal is one kingdom. And then if we go down to the phylum, we have the phylum Chordate. So these animals have a special type of nerve. So chordates have a special type of nerve that they share together. And we can see that the spider and the ant were excluded from the chordate group because they do not have that special nerve. And then if we go to the next group, mammals. So mammals are animals that carry their babies in their womb. And we can see that birds were excluded from that group because birds have their babies in eggs. And then the next group is primates, including the monkey, the gorilla, and the human. And with primates have the opposable thumbs that we learned about, using they able to take their thumb and then touch their other fingers using their thumb. And that's something that the horse and the kangaroo cannot do. That's why they're not part of primates. And they usually have bigger brains, relatively bigger size of brain to their body size. And then if we go to more specific, we have the hominid, which are the primates that do not have tail, which include the genus gorilla and the genus Homo. We're part of the Homo genus, and specifically we're in the Homo sapiens species, and that's the modern type of human. So as you can see, we went from a really generous group, a general group, to a more specific group, and we went through the different levels of classifications. Now that's not all the levels, but this is just to show you what it represents. So this is a task for you to try and do. Can you look at this and figure out what information is it giving us? And can you answer those questions about this diagram? I'll help you with it. So you can see there is the common name of the animal. We have a red kangaroo, we have a eastern grey kangaroo, and we have a common Werreloro. Sorry, I can't pronounce that correctly. We have the different levels of classification: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, description of the species, and the scientific name. So usually each animal specific species have its own scientific name. Try to see if you can make sense of this and answer those questions. We'll try to answer those questions in the next video.